Thank you.
So yes, I'll invite all of the last segment speakers to the front for question and answer period, please. And Sarah's stepping up to the mic with our questions from our external folks. So go ahead, Sarah.
Susan. The ILAR Committee on Guidelines for Humane Transportations received an initiative to develop a self-contained overshipper to ship non-human primates. And this author reminds us that an overshipper is a closed, environmentally controlled container into which the standard primary enclosure is loaded. And they want to know, has there been any progress on this? It's ILAR they're asking. They're saying the ILAR Committee on Guidelines for Humane Transportation.
It seems to me I recall that recommendation. And I believe in the UK there was some efforts made, not specifically for non-human primates, but for other species. In particular, I want to say it was rodents. And so that was, in fact, looked at, and there was an attempt. I think the problem was, number one, it was a huge device with a lot of mechanical things on it and batteries and good things that airlines really like to put inside their cargo hold. And so it would be almost untenable if you were to ship 30 monkeys to even get them on one aircraft, let alone whatever. So yes, there was some progress made. To the best of my knowledge, this was undertaken in Europe. I do not recall it being undertaken in the U.S.
Now, the next two questions are directed at you, Joe. This author wants to follow up on your answer related to the herpes B, herpes simplex 1, and they put in parentheses cold sores, won't kill me. But herpes B has a very high fatality rate in humans. Can he clarify his answer?
I'm not sure what part of the answer they want clarified.
I'm not either. You remember the question?
Oh, sure, I remember the question. I can say in general, it's very unusual for pharmaceutical companies and CROs to even ship B virus positive animals. Most companies have a definition of specific pathogen free that includes an animal that doesn't have SIV, SRV, STLV, or B virus, or as it's properly known, Macacine herpes virus 1. So in my years at Charles River, I can count the number of animals that came through that were B virus positive on one hand. So the perception that there are a large number of B virus positive animals being shipped is simply not true. And of course, you know, if you look at the island of Mauritius, again, those animals don't have B virus on the island. So any animal that comes in from Mauritius, at least initially, is going to be B virus negative. Again, my personal bias, and I've actually written this in a paper, is that a B virus negative animal isn't really a good model of a human, because we all have the homologous virus, herpes simplex 1 or herpes simplex 2. You know, if you look at the entire history since Albert Sabin identified herpes virus or B virus in 1933, there have been something like 30 or 40 people infected. So it's very difficult to get a cross-species transmission of one of these simplex viruses. So it's something that's very unlikely to occur. And if you look at the PPE that the personnel were wearing, who were working with the non-human primates, again, as long as people are transporting them safely, the animals are in quarantine, the people are wearing the appropriate PPE, they're protected.
Here's the next one. Looking at the picture with the ruler, what would have happened if it didn't pass inspection upon arrival in the U.S.?
Well, most likely it would be a letter or a citation from Fish and Wildlife Service. the IATA crate standards are for straight-sided crates. And if you have a straight-sided crate, then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service requires additional spacing, both vertically and horizontally, between crates. And that can extend to 6 inches on every side, so essentially putting a foot between crates. You can also address the concern for ventilation by sloping the sides. And so most people now just slope the sides, and that's no longer a concern.
So I just have some questions. I'm taking my regulatory hat off for a second, pretending that I am somebody new. I'm a little guy. I'm not Charles River. I'm not Covance. And I'm a little guy, and I've got a little program. We want to start doing some research. And the first question is, how can I get these shipping crates or boxes, or where do I get them from? How do I know I'm getting the right one? And this, my other question directed to Marshall, it's my understanding that some airlines are not taking ferrets because ferrets have a way of getting out of things and doing what ferrets do, finding a little hole, and they've chewed wire and brought down a plane. So, I mean, that's what I heard. So I'm just saying, in general, how do we educate the public on getting the right box or knowing where to go to get the right crates, or who's selling them?
Well, in terms of getting the right crates, I can tell you that we, with some regularity, have prospective customers that will call us and ask if they can buy crates from us because they want to defer the evaluation of the multitude of potential crates out there to someone who has some experience with it. We're not in the business of selling crates, but we're more than happy to advise people on what to look for, things like the thickness of the plastic, the gauge of the wire in the door, and the ventilation openings that was discussed at length today. So we're happy to help with that process. Look at photos, for example. We may recognize some of the brand names that are out there based on our experience, so we can help steer people in the right direction.
Let me take part of this as well. I think with almost no exception, most rodent suppliers will also provide crates for specific species that they have used to successfully ship. There'll be some kind of nominal cost for that. They generally will come without any source-specific labeling. So I don't want you to ship your hamsters in my mouse container and then have the airlines come looking for me to pay the $75,000 or whatever a day. But I pretty much you can get those from suppliers of the producers of these animals. As far as whether they're compliant with IATA guidance, the folks that ship a lot of these animals will make sure they're in compliance. So there also, you can go to certain publications. I want to say it's Lab Animal. They'll have a buyer's guide. Often they will list in there suppliers of shipping containers. When you get to some very specific things such as ferrets and non-human primates, I'm not sure how, I haven't looked recently what's out there, but one way or the other you can obtain them commercially and usually at a nominal cost.
Bill,
Yep.
can I
Sure.
the airline piece of it?
Yeah, grab it.
If you are a small shipper, one of the first things you're going to have to do is become an approved shipper of the products, and that shows that to the airline that you have an expertise, you are have an approved business plan, you have been in this business for a certain period of time, and all those things are taken into consideration as to whether you are approved. That also gets run by Homeland Security. So if you're a little guy, you're going to have to jump through all those hoops before you even tender it to an airline, even if you have the correct containers.
And just to come back to the ferret question, you are correct that ferrets are considered as escape artists. And you really do have to pay close attention to that with the shipping crate. We've taken it to the point where we designed our own crate and have it made specifically for our use because we couldn't find anything out there that we thought was suitable. And don't ship ferrets in cardboard boxes because they won't stay there for long. So we use a very durable, hard plastic container with very small ventilation openings. And as was mentioned, I think by Bill, you have the issue with bite radius with ferrets as well. So if you've got a very flat, hard plastic surface, they can't get their teeth into it, so they can't start gnawing through it. I don't know that there was ever a ferret that brought down a plane. I hope that was in a movie somewhere.
What I heard.
Well, there have been certain incidences that have caused emergency landings.
I have two questions. The first one is for Joe, and it's just more of a curiosity question on the photograph you showed of the staff members from the airline taking the non-human primates out of the plane. Is there a way for someone to check to make sure nothing is loose in the plane before they actually go in and drop the big cargo door, or is that a risk point that occurs in the process?
Great question. The cargo bay is contiguous with the pilot compartment, and there was a veterinarian on the shipment. So a veterinarian was checking the animals throughout the transportation or shipment. So they were relatively sure that there were no animals that were escaped.
Okay.
Cargo only.
Yeah, it was. It was a charter.
Yeah, maybe he needs
Oh, so the clarification is it was a charter plane. It was a cargo-only charter plane. So there
Okay.
were no seats in there for humans and things like
Okay.
that.
Thanks. The second one is for Bill, and sorry, Bill, you asked Kate a question. So, anyway, with the flooring that you were talking about in the crates, you were saying you wanted it designed to keep the animals dry, but also to keep things from wicking through to the bottom. I guess I got a little confused in that. Could you elaborate?
Sure. So in any container, the floor, if you have perforations in the floor by use of some kind of fasteners, whether it be staples or some other type of fastening device, any moisture that is free in the bottom of the crate can in fact wick itself out, which would allow fluids to accumulate below it, and et cetera. So the way that that's handled in those companies that use a fiberboard or cardboard or laminated plastic board, there's all sorts of stuff out there, is to put in what's called a drop-in floor. So in addition to the floor of the crate, there's a piece of, it can be cardboard and an absorbent pad, very much like a diaper would be. Mm-hmm. And on top of it is wire, and the wire is unfinished around all four sides. So when you drop it in, the wire kind of click, 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 click on down and then locks in place. So the animals can't get under the wire because the free edge is actually poking through the wire and serves as a lock. That way, and then on top of that, you put bedding materials, often something that they can burrow in a bit, usually wood shavings or some sort of appropriate paper product that's shredded or whatever. And that starts the process of absorbing the moisture, but anything that makes its way through, next has to get through the cardboard lining or the paper lining on the, if you would, the overfloor, top floor, before it even gets to the subfloor. The subfloor has a Michelman coating on, so does if you have a cardboard insert in there. So the chances of things wicking their way out is very low. Also, if you notice that the edges were folded when you look at the corners, so there is actually, you have no direct channel going down through the sides at the corners. So trust me, there's a lot of engineering and trial and error that goes into crate construction, and so these are options that can be used.
Thanks.
Oh, my friends again.
Okay, we have another one from, another question from our colleagues online. And I have some comments about this question myself. Regarding the negative influence extremist organizations have had on private and government-funded transportation companies, what recommendation does the panel have to influence a more positive response across our research industry and affiliates? Examples of our affiliates are ILAR, ALAS, and APV. I'm not aware that we have any government-funded transportation companies. Pat, Carol? No, we're from the government, and we don't know about government-funded transportation companies. So I think, Andy, you talked about the influence, perhaps, of animal rights organizations on your private company. Maybe you could speak to what recommendations does the panel have to influence a more positive response across our research industry and affiliates?
Well, I think the question relates to not necessarily just how to bring about a positive response across the industry, but how to translate that into influencing air carriers, because we've been somewhat ineffective in doing that thus far. I know that there are various organizations now engaged in efforts to try and encourage people to speak out about the positive side of animal research, as it were, the benefits to both people and to animals, because in some cases the extremists are very good at disseminating their opinions and their viewpoints and what they perceive to be the negatives associated with animal research. And historically, that hasn't been well countered with positive information. And there's a lot of reasons for that, I suppose. But in the absence of hearing the other side of the story, it's easy to understand how folks within airline operations may be persuaded by the only side of the story that they do hear.
Oh, and I'm going to comment on that too and say that this workshop is an example of all of us in the industry coming together and sharing information in the hopes that we can do even better than we have done, and also to inform the public about the rules and regulations and guidelines and the thoughtful way that we operate. And it's our hope, my hope at least, that they'll make up their own minds based on having some more information about what we do. We mentioned earlier that we have a parking lot outside, which is a bulletin board for you to write your opinions, and there was a request for people to put not only questions but also opinions that might be useful to the ILAR Roundtable Committee. So here are some of those. I appreciate some of the challenges confronting the animal research community. Here's another. As airline transportation services continue to drop, will breeding facilities increase to meet the demand for laboratory animals? As the demand for lab animals increases, who will supply international animals needed for specific research? The speaker presentations were very informative and useful in understanding the complexities of animal transportation. So I think maybe two of these are questions that we're meant to answer. Does anyone want to comment on, as airline transportation services continue to drop, will breeding facilities increase to meet the demand for lab animals? Bill?
Okay, so I think one has to realize that the more facilities that are breeding animals in the greater and greater locations in order to support their research, the more difficult it's going to be not to overproduce. Investigators, people are just basically impatient. Okay, so if I tell you I'd be glad to give you those rats in 6 months, that's not on your timetable. So you have the pressure to overproduce, to have what we call a a negative a negative PSR ratio, meaning that I'm producing more animals than I'm selling, just so I can cater to the specific requirements. And then there's a whole issue that I don't think people understand, and that is these services kind of are cash and carry. So there is no third-party payer here. So if a breeder's going to put a facility somewhere, there has to be a reasonable market for the animals. So it can't be a market for just a few, or it's convenient. But and transporting animals safely and humanely is the way to really address the 3 R's. Otherwise, there would be just horrible overproduction. There's no way to control it very well. That's the fact of life, unfortunately.
And the question is repeated again, but in the international context. And my guess is your answer will be the same.
It's pretty much the same. It's where the research is being done. And again, there's, let's talk about Montana, okay? Montana's a place you can't get to from here. And if you look at the routes by air and you look at the routes by truck, it's a long distance, but it's going to be worse trying to justify a production facility in Montana. No offense to anybody online who's from Montana, but that's just the way it is. And internationally, it's the same thing. And as you can see, Europe is got lots of countries, but any one of them may not be able to actually support in terms of making it economically feasible for someone to commercially produce and provide these animals. And then if you get into government funding, somebody has to pay the bill. There is no free lunch.
Okay, I'm David Kurtz, NHS, and I guess I'll probably close this session with a fish question that I have, so I'll let David give a chance. As a veterinarian, I actually enjoy working with zebrafish, and I'm saddened that my facility no longer has aquatics. I'm trying to get somebody back in there, but I really enjoy working with them, and you're right, the use of these animals and these models has just exploded. But I have two questions for you. One, is cryopreserved sperm the only available cryopreserved germplasm for zebrafish right now?
Yeah, at this time, that's the only storage method we have. There is some work on stem cells or other germ cells, but I think cryopreservation of sperm is the main method we're working on now.
And with shipping the embryos, I never really thought about that. I mean, obviously with zebrafish, there's a very short incubation time. And that, do you limit how far you may ship them? I mean, because they're going to be hatching.
No, they're larval fish by the time they arrive to international destinations, but they spend the first few days out of the Coreon inflating their swim bladder and just kind of resting and absorbing their yolk. So by the time they've arrived, they are ready to start eating, and they pose a much less of an escape hazard on planes than all these other models. So use more fish.
Mark Klinger from NYU. I don't know if this was directly addressed, but is there data or statistics that compare I mean, we know that for people, air travel is safer than riding around in automobiles. Is there similar data that compares transport of animals by air and adverse events with those that travel on the ground by automobile? To the panel.
Anybody else want to take a whack at this? Okay. I think I'm going back to the same, now I'm regretting ever preparing it for ILR, but as we look at it, it does not appear that there is that much difference between air and ground in terms, but we do not have a measure that excludes all other, I'll call them failure scenarios. So wrong sex, wrong weight, wrong age, wrong strain, that kind of thing, wrong number. That, unfortunately, the way the data is kept by commercial breeders, which is the one source of transporting animals that I had access to, it was impossible because of their different record-keeping systems to really split that out. I will tell you that we have not very many complaints that are directly related to the carriage method. All right, just that's an observation. I kind of have an office down the hall from customer service, and the lady who collects all those complaints and goes to myself or one of our colleagues. We just don't get that many. But that's not data. That's my impression. So, and there's not a good way, too, because you have to determine really what the cause was. Was it the transportation method, or was, we'll get complaints of something happening 2 weeks after the animals arrive? Well, my guess is that's something that happened at the facility. All right, so it's really hard to separate out that data, just pure and simple.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for a very productive day. I see no one else at the microphones, so I think this will conclude our question and answer period for today. We'll look forward to seeing everybody bright and early tomorrow morning for another full day of presentations. At this point, I'd like to thank our panelists this afternoon and this morning, as well as the committee that's organized this workshop. Thank you again.